Beautiful. All right, that was it. Yeah, okay. Thanks very much for the introduction, Dion. And it's great to be here. It's my first time in Australia, and it's sort of home from home with the weather. Looking weird, really, but it's great to see some people that I've known for a while, sort of online and meeting at conferences and things, but also just to be able to
Can I get you to use the microphone? Sorry.
I can try.
It's probably something else we should have checked.
Mike?
Oh, wow, yeah.
All right, so now hopefully everybody can hear me. All right, so yeah, I'm going to be talking today about our Dev Days, but give a little bit of background as to why I'm talking about this. So as Dion mentioned, I'm currently working as a research software engineering fellow. The EPSRC is the funder in the UK. I'd just like to mention them because obviously it's very nice to be funded for 5 years. And to be able to work on this area. These are all the sort of different aspects of the work that I've been doing under my fellowship. So contributing to the R project is the main one through code, infrastructure and outreach. And then to a lesser extent, contributing to other packages on CRAN, capacity building in R and data science at Warwick University, where I'm based, and wider community building in the R and RSE research software engineering communities with a focus on equality, diversity and inclusion. I don't know what acronym you use in Australia, but EDI is what we say in the UK. So one sort of big event that I planned as part of my fellowship was to organise an R project sprint. I was quite inspired by some of the events that our Open Sci had organised in the past, these sort of hackathons that seem very effective at sort of mobilising people and getting them involved in the R community. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to do something similar for people that to encourage people to contribute to R itself. So this was something that I had great support for. And we were able to get about 50 people together and provide travel funding, and which is quite important in being able to bring together people from all around the world. Not quite all around the world, as we'll see. So we weren't very organised about taking a group photo, so we had two photos with not everybody in either. And you can see we had there's a couple of people there. I don't know if you see my arrow, but there's Paul Morale from Auckland University and Uwe Liggers from Dortmund University, and there were a couple of others that were online, either expected or unexpected, because there were unfortunately issues with the air traffic control or something that affected some people, but thankfully there were a good bunch that were able to make it in person. So who was it that came? A good proportion of the R core team were involved. 11 people came along. There were a sort of similar number of invited people. So these were people that were already sort of experienced contributors and would be able to mentor others. And then there were 30 people that were selected by application. So we were asked people to sort of say why they wanted to come, what their background was, and so on. And we tried to select a sort of diverse range of people. And of the non-core developers, there were 25 out of 40 that self-identified as coming from underrepresented groups. So we were quite happy that we were able to bring together quite a diverse group. You'll notice from the map there was nobody from Australia, but we will rectify that as we go along. And of course, the UK was a bit overrepresented because that's where it was based, and I was organising it and everything. So what did we get up to? This is a broad overview of what we got up to at the sprint. Translation, that's translating the messages, errors and warnings that are in the source code of base R, and some infrastructure around that, so documentation and administration of the translation platform. Working on the documentation within R itself, those help files that you look at when you're working in R, So there was a lot of bug reports related to that. So a group worked on triaging and looking at some of those bug reports. And then a wide range of bug fixes or work on new functionality that I group into these different categories. So accessibility. So we had Jonathan Godfrey from Massey University, who's a blind R user as part of the sprint. And so he had a couple of issues that he wanted us to look at. One was logging-based graphics, so that people can get a non-visual output of what's happening when base graphics are produced. Various low-level issues, such as optimizing random number generation and reducing the overhead in those functions. Issues related to packages, such as improving the messages sent. I think that's to package maintainers rather than the CRAN maintainers. Just reading that again. So the maintainers of packages on CRAN, I think is what they meant to have there. There were some more statistical issues. So one was related to enhancing sample.int for unequal probability sampling. And this is work that got a little bit stalled. So there was some progress at the sprint and a little bit of progress since, but it still hasn't made it into R yet. And then some issues related to graphics, such as adding support for 3-digit hex codes in addition to 6-digit hex codes. It's just a sort of convenient way to specify colors in graphics. So this is sort of in pictures, the sort of activity. So this is a translation activity. Around 2,000 messages were worked on. So either new translation or updated translation. And in some cases, that translation was approved. In some cases, it was just a suggestion, or people looked at it and said, this is a message that needs editing. But you can see quite a wide range of languages. And we had quite a few people from Latin America there. So Brazilian, Portuguese and Spanish were particularly a lot of work done there. And then this is in terms of bugs. So you can see that a lot of things sort of end up in this bin called low level, sort of, things that are sort of just sort of a bit technical and a bit hard to categorize any other way. And then there was that big bunch of documentation issues, and then the sort of smaller tail of these more sort of specific categories. And the darker colors, the blue and the purple, are ones where an issue was closed or a patch was proposed. So there's quite a lot of progress made on those issues. And the lighter colours are ones where it was a bit earlier in the process. So maybe just a discussion about whether something was a good idea or not. Maybe a plan of action if it was a big issue. And would maybe something that would take months rather than just something that could happen in a few-day sprint. Then at least a roadmap was created, and in many cases, work was started, but still in progress by the end of the 3-day sprint. So people enjoyed it, and they said, "This is great. When are we doing this again?" And I was like, "Oh well, I hadn't actually planned that. I planned this event, and I got funding for this event, and then, I just hoped that things would sort of magically happen after that." And I realized I had to come up with a plan, and that's where our Dev Days came from. So the idea is that 1-day versions of the sprint, and we've been organising them as satellites to our conferences. So the idea is that, hopefully people can make their way to the conference. Maybe they get funding to go from their work, and it's not too much to add on an extra day. And so these are the ones that we've held so far. So a couple as satellites to the Use R conference, which is the main R conference organised by the R Foundation. And then a few that are, quite a few really that are in the UK, unsurprising, as I'm sort of leading the organisation. And then some other international conferences like POSITConf, Latin Art, Rencontre Air is the French-speaking conference. There was actually in Belgium this year. And in terms of diversity, we haven't been collecting quite such detailed data, but about half identify as underrepresented where we have the data, and there's good representation of our ladies. So this is the group of our ladies that came to one of the recent ones at RSECon Research Software Engineering Conference 25 in the UK. And maybe just point out, so the person I've got my arrow on, and I'll just point it out here as well because it might be a bit small. So that's Ella. That's my colleague who works with me as part of my fellowship, and her name will be cropping up quite a lot in the talk as she's been involved in many of the events like me. And you might recognize some of the other people there. So Erica is the co-founder of Rladies Jakarta. We've got Riva Quiroga, who's a member of the Rladies global team. I think Saranjit Kaur might also be on the global team, or she's got some, yeah. So there's quite a lot, and we finally got some Australians. So there's people that live in Australia, Emi Tanaka and Fonty Carr. So Australians or people that live in Australia have been represented too.
I think that was Fondy's second time. She was at.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. I don't have that many photos. Yeah. And yeah, so I'm visiting Australia and New Zealand. Obviously I'm in Australia now, and I'll be visiting New Zealand after, and organising some RDev days as part of that, so that give people a chance to join in if they haven't previously. So we're organising one next Friday. The main in-person event is here in Melbourne, I think even in this room. Is that right?
Sorry?
Or is it going to be in this room? Or in this building, I think.
I think so, probably.
Right.
It's in here. Whether in this room, I need to double check.
Okay, all right. Well, somewhere close to where we are now. And then we've got people that are organising sort of local hubs in Brisbane and Perth, so that people there can meet in person as well. And then people can also join remotely. When I checked the tickets today, there were 3 tickets available for in person in Melbourne. So if you hadn't signed up, and by the end of your talk you'd like to sign up, then please do. And yeah, if you want to join virtually and there isn't a ticket, then maybe get in touch and we'll see if we can add you in as well. If you can't make it this time, you've got a clash or whatever, then there's the New Zealand one coming up in December, and this one's going to be organised a bit differently. So we're spreading it over 2 days and having a morning stream and an afternoon stream, so that people can join over a wider range of time zones, because not so many people can get to Auckland. So that's the idea there. So what happens on our Dev Day? So we try and prepare issues in advance, as some are added quite last minute, but the idea is we prepare them in advance on a GitHub repo as issues. Some of them are taken from the official R bug tracker, but we often sort of give a bit of extra scaffolding, a bit of extra help to get people started. Then people turn up, and maybe they've looked at the issues in advance, or maybe they haven't, and do it at the beginning of the day and say what they're interested in. And then if a few people are interested in working on something, they form a small group, and we break up into these small groups for collaborative work for the rest of the day. So for pretty much the rest of the talk, I'm just going to be giving some examples of tasks to give you a bit of better idea, focusing particularly on issues that our ladies have worked on. So first, let's look at issues related to our contributors' infrastructure. Again, sort of within my fellowship and as part of the R contributor working group, which I didn't mention, but was actually set up before my fellowship started, we've sort of developed some different assets, I've called them here, to support people that want to contribute to base R. So we have a website, which is on the official R project domain, contributor.rproject.org. That has links to our Slack group, calendar of events, some videos of tutorials and things, and some other resources, including a link to the RDev guide, which is a quarto book, as you see over here, with that sort of documents various aspects of contributing to R, from reporting bugs to reviewing them and contributing a patch or working on the documentation or translations. There's also the RDev container, which I'm not going to talk about too much today, but that's a containerized development environment that you can launch through the browser, so that you have a VS Code IDE that's sort of got the prerequisites for you to build R. And so it's a bit of an easier environment to work in than trying to get set up on your own computer. So some related tasks there that people have been working on recently. So at the last RDev Day, because the R Contributors website was quite recently converted to Quarto, and it has a light theme and a dark theme. And a simple task there was to combine these two themes into one brand YAML file. You might have heard of these sort of brand YAML where you can specify a sort of branding for your Quarto site. So that was worked on by Claire Welsh. There's been various contributions to the RDev guide itself. So Isabella Velasquez and Lydia Gibson wrote a new section on how to make a feature request if you want to make a feature request to R. And I work with Ella Kay and Simisani and Daba, who's Rladies leader in Gaborone, Botswana. And we were looking at best practices for all our different repos. So obviously all of these assets have a repo behind them. And we sort of came up with a list of essential and advisable practices. So at the moment, it's mainly a concept. We still have to sort of implement it all. But we've sort of set out what we think are good practices at least. Translations, we've seen a bit of this already. The translation platform that I mentioned in passing is called Weblate, and we have an instance set up on this link here. And basically, it provides a user-friendly interface for contributing translations. So you just use it through the browser. And we have the messages from base R and also the recommended packages. So here I'm just showing you the components related to base R. And they're all split into components. So most of them are related to a particular package within R. So there's the base package itself, and then there's the compiler package, and there's other packages like the graphics, statistics, so stats, utils, tools, all of those sort of core packages in R. And most of those have two components. One relates to the messages in the C files, and one relates to messages in the R files. And there are also a couple that you see there. The base R GUI is the Windows GUI, and the Mac GUI isn't actually in the core sources, but we've got the components for that as well, so that you can translate the messages that appear sort of on the menus and the buttons within the graphical user interface. Here are the languages, so that there's 27 languages supported in base R, but it varies a lot as to the coverage. So I've given a couple of examples here. Simplified Chinese is reasonably well, about 3/4 translated. Indonesian is a new language. It's sort of a bit aspirational, just a few messages translated there. This is the view that I get, by the way, which is why you've got English United Kingdom at the top. I didn't actually show you, I don't think, what the interface looks like. Maybe I should have had another screen there. But basically, when you click through to a particular message, it will show you the English source string, and then there's just a box where you can fill in the translation. And there's also helpers to sort of suggest automatic translation. So here are some of the translators. These are ordered by how many translations they've done. I'm a bit unfortunately at the top, and that's because I sort of did a bulk translation from English to British English. And obviously that's not much work. There's only a few things that need changing. So ignore that and focus on and actually Lukasz is similar. There was a bulk upload of Polish translation, so I don't think he did them all himself. But so we might have to ignore the first two, but certainly other people, particularly the folk I've highlighted here, Nicole Haynes, Gabriela de Lima Marin, Paola Corrales, and Renata Hirota are all sort of in the top 20 translators. So that's nice. And there's various tasks that are related to translation. So Gabriela looked at how we could make better use of automatic translation. So as I mentioned, if you look at a single string, you can get a suggestion, but you can also sort of download all the strings for a particular, well, no, I think you can get it to translate all the strings in a particular component, and then you can sort of set it to translate them all, and then sort of set them as marked for editing, so they still get human review. It saves a little bit of time, but yeah, they do still need review. Then we've got a dashboard. I think I've got some pictures in a moment, so we'll come back to that. But there was a team that were working, sort of reviewing that and proposing how that could be improved. And then Saranjeet is leading a project on creating a new package to manage the glossary. So we've got a glossary, and we'd also like to sync with other projects that have a glossary, so that related to our data science, so that we can sort of borrow each other's translations and sort of have some consistency. So she's just got a bit of funding from the Art Consortium to do a bit of work on that package. Yeah, so this is the dashboard. It's not very pretty. It was sort of developed in a couple of Google Summer of Code projects, and that's why there are two views of it that look totally different. So the one on the left is the status of translations in the development of version of R itself, so the official R sources. And the one on the right is the status of translations on WebLate, because there's a bit of a delay. People contribute their translations on WebLate, and then somebody has to sort of create a patch to actually contribute that back to R. So this is what it looks like. It needs a bit of love. So these are some plans that Riva and her team came up with at one of the recent R Dev days. So they wanted to improve the structure of the actual repository. So that's the sort of initial work that's almost done. Then the plan is to convert it into a Quarto dashboard. So at the moment it's using Flex dashboard. And then so at the moment, a lot of the code is just sort of in the sort of index RMD file, and it would be good to sort of extract some of the working code out into functions. The visualizations could definitely be improved, both in terms of as they are now, but maybe we need different visualizations, because thinking about what would really be useful for people to see. And then some work around the documentation and governance, sort of just again going back to those good practices of having a useful README, a contributors file, defining the code owners, and so on. There's quite a bit there that could be worked on, and I hope to open some related issues for the RDev Day. Okay, moving on to R manuals. So you may or may not know that R has 5 official manuals. And these are their sort of short names. So there's the Introduction to R, R Data Import and Export, I think it's the R Data one, R Admin, which is about installation and administration of R installations, R Extensions, which is the manual about writing R packages, and then 2 manuals that are more about the sort of internals of R and the R language itself.
So-
So
Can I just interrupt you? I see 6 there. What? And it says 5. What does that mean?
I just miscounted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I don't know if I was collating 2 bits of information, but I think it must be 6 because all of those names seem right. Thank you. Yeah, so we've had a few issues related to this. So one was making sure that the manuals were linked properly to the help pages, in particular linking to particular sections, because most of these manuals are pretty huge. So it's not very helpful to just say, look at our extensions. You want to know which, section to look at. Adding, filling in some of the missing information on the bibliographic data, a lot of references in those manuals, and obviously we want to give the best information we can for people that want to look up those references. And then another one was working on improving the CSS. So this is what the R manuals used to look like. You might recognize them if you've ever gone to the web page. And this is a more modern look, with newer fonts and narrower screen that adapts better to mobile and things like that. So I think this is what you'll see if you look at the development version of the manuals, and obviously this will sort of percolate through so that this is what they always look like in the HTML version. And then maybe this is what you thought I'd be talking about, R code. And we'll see that it's very rare that you just work on the R code. Normally you have to do something to the code, and then you either need to also update the documentation and or add some tests. So let's have a look at a few examples here. So here's one that Erin and Ella worked on, which is there was a sort of a bigger task of removing master-slave terminology from R for obvious reasons. And this sort of particular issue related to Tickle TK took a bit longer to resolve because we were relying on the Tickle TK software. So if you don't know, Tickle TK is some software for creating graphical user interfaces, sort of the quite basic dialogue. So if you've had that sort of pop-up that gives you the choice of crown mirrors or something like that, those sort of dialogues. So we had to wait for that project to update its functions first, so that then we could update things in R. So once that had happened, the changes were relatively simple. So you can see that there's lots of R functions, and they're basically just wrappers around the Tickle TK commands. So we just sort of need to know which command are we talking about. So there used to be one that was grid slaves, and now they've changed that to grid child. So the work that Erin and Ella had to do was to deprecate the old version. So that's what this deprecated function is doing. It tells you what the new function you should use is, and then it has the old definition, and then add the new version, which is just to use TK grid child instead. So there were a few of these. I've just shown the first one, and then once they'd made the changes to the code, and then they just had to make a minor update to the documentation. So make sure that if somebody looked for help on TK grid child, they'd be able to find that. You see that slaves are still there because people might have some old code that still uses the old name, and that would probably have to stay there for 1 or 2 versions until the function is properly defunct rather than deprecated. All right, here's a graphics one, LK again. So this was an issue of text and recycling. So here's a little example where we've got, we're plotting 1 to 7 against 1 to 7, very boring plot, just as an example. And then we've got some X and Y coordinates for our labels. So our labels are A, B, C, D. So, and these are our X and Y. So A gets plotted at 1, 2, there, 1, 2. B gets plotted at 2, 3, yep. And then we cycle, all right? So C gets plotted at 1, 4. And then we've got another letter, D, but we've sort of run out of places, so we just go back to the beginning, 1, 2, which is very unlikely that anybody wants to do that, you know, and it gives no warning or error, it just plots it back over the top. So we thought we could do better than that. So that this was the couple of snippets of code that they had to add to the text function. The first bit is just to make sure that the code can handle language objects. So language objects are the symbols of function names, calls to functions, or expressions. So that's a little bit technical, but the main point is what's going on here, which is to say that if the length of labels is bigger than the length of the X variable, then we give a warning and just take the first label. So in the example I gave, instead of trying to plot A, B, C, D, we just add A, B, C and give a warning to say that we've got more labels than points. Yeah. So that was the change that was made to the code. And of course, we then need to update the R help file. So the help file, source file, the source for the help file is in this RD format. And it's sort of a LaTeX-like format. So this is what it used to say, that if labels is longer than code, than X and Y, the coordinates are recycled to the length of labels. And now they updated it to say labels is truncated to the maximum length of X and Y. Okay. Here's one with a little utility function from the tools package called to title case. So it's converting text to title case. And it's there were a few sort of issues that they worked on. So this was just part of it actually. But in an example where you've got a hyphen, so so in this, such as this example where we've got pre and post estimation, it was capitalizing and, whereas we don't think it should. All right, so there are lots within the tools title case definition, which is in this in the tools package. There are sort of lots of rules about when to capitalize, when not to capitalize. It's one of those things that it seems like a simple function, but you can imagine that there's lots of rules. And so basically they just needed to add in an extra rule to say, you know, don't capitalize these LPAT words. So there's a sort of list of words like and that you shouldn't capitalize if it comes after a hyphen. So I just needed to add that case into the code. And this isn't really something you need to document, but it is something that you might want to test. So in R, it has a bunch of test scripts, and here they just added, and this reg here stands for regression test. So if a change has been made to fix a bug, often a test is added to check that the fix isn't undone by later changes to the code, right? That's what's meant by a regression test. So it will be labeled, often labeled with a comment that says this is a test added because of this bug, and it's testing the very specific thing. So when we've got a hyphen like this, we expect it to give exactly the same result as if we didn't have the hyphen. Okay. Yes, this is a bug that had a not very helpful summary in the original bug report, so I changed it. So the task was to modify this function called glyph font, so that it always just produced a single font description. So the problem was that people could potentially pass arguments to it with length longer than one, and it was a bit unclear what would happen. Well, in fact, what used to happen is it would give an error, whereas maybe that's a bit harsh. We can just take the first element of whatever argument it gives us and give a warning. So the code will still run, it will still do something sensible, but the user will get a warning that maybe that's not what they wanted. So the changes to the code were basically to replace these errors, so these calls to stop when it found an argument that was not of length 1, and instead just to take the first element and give a warning. And again, this is a case where it was very similar fix in several places to the code. So I've just shown you the first change. And then there were similar changes for the index, family, weight, and style arguments. Was there a second part to that? Yeah, so this was sort of a regression test in this case. So it looks a bit more complicated than our last one, mainly because of the way the diff is displayed here. But you can see in the old code, which is the highlighted in red, those are the lines that have been deleted. We used to try to run glyph font with a list of 2 elements. So it should just be passed 1 element. Here we're passing 2. And the old test used to be check that this gives an error. Whereas now we're using the assert warn v function to say this should now give us a warning. Okay. So that's the change there. All right, so on this one, this is not quite wrapped up yet. So the change to the code has been made, the test has been added, this has been reviewed by our core developer, Paul Morel in this case, who's sort of particularly responsible for graphics. And the next steps are to do some further testing, in particular visual regression testing. So running some examples and checking that the image hasn't visually changed, and it does that sort of computationally, so it actually sort of looks to see if any pixels have changed, right? And also check that these changes don't break the mark. I think marquee is a package. I can't remember why that particular package is relevant, but obviously this is something that Paul thinks could potentially be broken, and we should check this before committing it to R. And so these sort of extra steps are open as an issue, so it'd be great to have someone work on that so that we can get this change added in. So all of the examples I've given have been relatively simple changes to the R code, documentation and tests. There are, of course, more complicated bugs that could come up, in particular issues related to the C code. There's a lot of C code in base R. So that's a bit beyond the scope of my talk today, but it is still something that relatively new contributors can contribute to. And my colleague Ella Kay gave a talk about that. Well, she gave it first at the USAR conference, and she gave it recently for Rladies Philly. And in there, she gives a couple of specific examples that she's worked on with contributors, making sort of relatively small changes to the C code. Yeah, in the first case, enhance R by adding new functionality, and in the second case, fixing a bug. Yes. And the final area that we sometimes have tasks about is CRAN packages. So I've only got one example here. There are other examples, but this is just, I think there was only one that I could find that had Rladies working on it. So that again, at the our Dev Day at the RSECon 25, there were a group that were making pull requests to CRAN packages that had a particular note from the CRAN check. So you may know that there's a set of tests that are run on every package on CRAN, and when people submit to CRAN, ideally they should have no warnings, errors or notes from these tests. But as over time, as things change or new tests are added, then packages that used to look okay, suddenly now they've got a note or a warning or something. So in this case, it was to do with lost braces. So if you remember seeing some of those RD files, that sort of LaTeX-like markup, there's a lot of these curly braces. It's very easy to, if you're sort of doing this by hand, to miss a curly brace. Or sometimes it's not sort of part of the markup. You actually want it perhaps as some of your mathematical notation, and that can confuse things as well. So yeah, sometimes these mistakes creep in, and so they've added a bit more rigorous testing to the CRAN check, and so now a lot of packages were getting this note. But it's often a very similar fix. So once you've sort of got familiar with the issue, you can often propose a patch relatively straightforwardly, and so that's what they were doing. And overall, they submitted pull requests for 36 packages. Some of those were outside the Dev Day, but I think it was still about sort of 15 or so packages that they created PRs for during the Dev Day. So that was quite a productive session. Yeah. And this is still something that we contributed to. We're also looking at ways to sort of automate this a bit. You know, like if you've got so sort of two parts of this, sort of writing some code that will fix common issues that keep coming up in the same packages, and then a sort of process for making a change, a sort of standard change to a package, and then opening a pull request so that it could be sort of as I say, semi-automated. You'd still need somebody to check it actually makes sense. You don't want to completely automate it. But I think in this particular issue was happening on a ridiculous number of packages, like 500 packages or something. So it would be nice to have a bit of automation there. Otherwise, it's going to take a long time. All right. So yeah, hopefully that's given you an idea about the sort of things that we get up to at our Dev Days, and perhaps hopefully it doesn't seem quite so scary as you might have thought, the idea of contributing to R itself. And hopefully you're inspired to perhaps have a go sometime, maybe at the ones coming up in the next couple of months. But if not, obviously, I mean, you can contribute to R anytime. You don't need an R Dev Day, but we do hope that there will continue to be R Dev Days as well, because it is nice to work with other people, and it helps you to put aside that time that otherwise you never really find. We do also run monthly contributors hours. There is one tomorrow, in fact. It's not a particularly friendly time for Australia, but it's not impossible, 9 o'clock at night. I am adding an extra one in December. I wasn't organised enough to organise an extra one in November. So 9 would be the usual time, because that's how it fits in with the UK times. But the idea of these is to support people that are coming to Dev Days, and also to support people that want to contribute on an ad hoc basis. You know, so if you don't want to set aside a whole day, but you're happy to do it as and when you have time, that's also cool. And you know, we can help you get started and help you with issues as you go along. And there's more general support on our website, as I mentioned before, about how you can contribute as an individual in different ways. And that's it. Thank you.
I guess we'll open up to any questions, if that's okay with you. Anyone got any questions?
Could you say a little bit more about the container?
Sure. What do you want to know?
Show us the interface.
Show you the interface. Yeah, I could probably, I mean, how much time have we got? Not a lot of time. Just wondering if I've got some screenshots. I don't think I have, but I will try and open one that I've opened before and see if that works. So, oops. All right. So you can run the dev container in other environments, but we generally recommend to use it on GitHub code spaces as that's what we've sort of prioritized to get working. You can see here I've got a couple of instances that I've worked on before, and I sort of labeled them by things that I'm working on. So you can sort of use them as sort of saving a workspace as well. So which is quite good. And this term plot issue is an RDev Day issue that sort of got more complicated. And so it's something that we've been working on, sort of chipping away at for a while. So this will reopen the code space with who knows what that I was working on. So you can see how long that takes to load. All right, so let me see if I can make this a bit bigger. All right, so if you're familiar with VS Code, then this will probably look at a familiar layout. We've got our this is just an ordinary terminal here with a little custom welcome message. You can see that we set up some environment variables that build dir, top source dir, and patch dir that are just that we then use in our instructions for building R. Let me see if I've got yeah, so we've also got some documentation around this, which would probably be useful to show. All right, so this is the documentation for the dev container. It tells you how you can get set up on GitHub code spaces. And then we've got these little tutorials for how to run R if you've never done that in VS Code. And then generally what you want to start with is building R. So this is where it explains about those environment variables I was just talking about. And then we then use those in the commands. It's probably a bit small again. For example, here I'm checking out the source code for R, which is in a Subversion repository on svn.rproject.org. And so once we check out the sources, we get those in our code space. So we should be able to see those in my code space. Yeah, here I've got the R sources. So for example, if we sort of dig into the directory, we can see it's got a library of the base packages. So for example, here's the graphics package. And if you've ever written an R package, you might sort of recognize this kind of structure. We've got description, namespace, and a folder with the R scripts and a man folder with the RD scripts, RD files, the sort of source for the help files that I was showing earlier. So those are sort of the key parts of the R sources to be familiar with. The regression tests that I was showing earlier will also be in there. There's a test folder, and we can go down. So they're sort of over time, it sort of started, regression test 1A, 1B, 1C. And this is where those sort of regression tests are added in. Yeah, so what we can do, just to carry on in here, is we get a copy of the R sources. We also download the source for the recommended packages, things like MAS and NLME. And then we set up a build directory and configure the build, and then make R. And those are the main steps to build R itself. And as I mentioned, the advantage of, the main advantage of doing it in the R dev container is that all the prerequisites for building R are already on the system. It's not going to interfere with anything that you've already got set up. You're not going to suddenly be working in the development version of R rather than the release version of R, whatever. It's completely isolated from your system. And once you've got it set up, then you can build R relatively quickly, and you can look at changes. So here's where we've been working on a one of the R files, and you can see the changes I've made relative to the base R version. Yeah. So it's a very brief intro. If you wanted to go through the whole building R process, that's the sort of thing we could do in a office hour, but it sort of takes about half an hour the first time, so I'm not going to do that now.
I have to say that in there, it compiles quite well. And you can say, hey, I've compiled R. It's like, it's really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, and that's sort of what our little tutorial does as well. So you build R, and then the next one is the R contribution workflow, where you just make a little change to a function and rebuild R, and you've got a customized version of R. It does something a bit different, so it's quite nice.
All right, I think we might leave it there.
Yeah,
Thank you
it's good.
so much.
All right.
Oh, really? Nah, it's all right. I think